hundreds of firearms specialists because they've left the Metropolitan Police in less than a year after widespread anger over an officer being charged with the murder of Chris Cabba. Between April and December 2023, the force has lost more than 250 authorised firearms officers, and that's about 1 in 10. In a moment, I'll speak to retired Metropolitan Police Superintendent Leroy Logan here in the studio. But first, somebody who knows all about this, it's Harry Tangney, former Armed Response Officer and author. Harry, very good evening to you. Welcome to the Independent Republic of Mike Graham. Are you surprised that so many officers have left?
No, not at all. I think they're thinking, well, what else can they do? Are they seriously going to risk being charged with murder now? They've always known that they are open to be judged in the eyes of the law. That's always the case. But they've always hoped that they would be treated differently from some random, say, gang leader or a bank robber who then shoots a member of the public, to actually comparing it with them, professional police officers, huge amount of training, and actually shoot 0.05% of the time, 1 in 2,000 firearms incidents. So they're not trigger happy. And they're just voting with their feet. And you think it's just London. It won't be just London, I can assure you. Maybe when London sneezes, the rest of the country catches a cold. They are very nervous, armed response officers are now. And they think, well, actually, I can cut this risk out. And their family's saying, you can cut this risk out. I don't want you being with that, doing that job anymore. It's thankless. And the chances are, as opposed to a couple of years ago, you now have a huge amount of chance of being judged from above. I get the idea, sorry to whittle on here, but I get the idea, and this is what people are telling me, that because of social media and communication, that decision's being shoved up a bit more in the interest of public interest. And, well, they don't need to do that. So they're not. They're going to do a job where they don't risk being charged with murder.
So, Leroy, welcome to the show. I mean, do they leave the police force altogether? Do they go and do different jobs in the police? And do you have sympathy for these guys?
Well, first, let me say, I'm not a firearms officer, but as a senior leader in the Met for 30 years, I know the need for them. They're very expertise, very dedicated, like Harry. And it is, to some extent, a thankless task. Like policing, it
in
is
general,
right across the board.
Particularly at the moment,
it is a thankless task. But no, but they're handing in their ticket. So that basically means they go back to other duties and not in the armed response vehicles or specialist firearms officers, because they're the ones that are called on when they're dealing with a violent person or an armed person, and it's commensurate with the risk. But as Harry said, everyone knows that when you apply for these jobs, even if you don't shoot and kill someone or you shoot and injure someone, you will be subject to scrutiny. Now, the Crown Prosecution Service, they have their internal CPS who look at these things, and so they do know the nuances of being a firearms officer and the challenges they have to face. And as a result of that, they will be very, very careful on not just leaving those officers out to dry, much less than putting it forward for the case to go to court. And invariably, it's not always just the public interest. It's around, is it proportionate? Is it necessary? And is that action accountable? And one of the main forms of accountability is being put to the courts.
But that's one of the problems, isn't it, Harry? Because the whole reason for an awful lot of people leaving is this identification situation, isn't it, with the killer or the police officer who shot Chris Cabba. I mean, we had an incident just in London a couple of weeks ago, or maybe even last week, down in Surrey Quays, where an intruder was trying to get into a home. The armed police were called. They shot him dead. That officer is now presumably being investigated and isn't working.
And they understand that. And in the old days, I was involved with post-incident management with post-shootings. I was in firearms for 23 years and VIP protection and so on. We all understood that in the old days, you'd get detective superintendent come along and treat it like a murder because that's the only way they knew to do it, how to do it, to investigate it. Then they suddenly realised that police officers really should be treated as witnesses until there is some evidence to show that, nah, this is really different. This is somebody who's gone renegade, who's just gone off on one and randomly shot someone, or there's been involved in a domestic incident and involved something. That's clear, and that will be quite clear early on. But when you've got a spontaneous incident like the one you've just mentioned, fast flowing, bang, 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 and they will have been trained on that time and time again. And a lot of the time, a lot of these exercises they're given is, well, are they suffering from mental health? Are they autistic? Okay, well, just change your tone now on your challenge, and then let's see if we can not rush them into a decision if we don't need to. It's very much involved in it. 14-week course, and it was 50% failure rate until they were very, very much stricter on the selection. So these are very, very skilled officers, and they just want to be treated like they want to treat it really as witnesses, always be judged by the law. But the fear now, this is out to precedent now. Okay, now they're worried. I don't want this, because you don't want to be a copper in a prison, especially when you've been firearms, been nicking the worst people in our society. Right. You don't want to be there. And even if they're cleared at a jury and whatever, that is 2 years, 3 years of hell.
So in your view, then, should they not be naming this officer in the Chris Kaveh case?
Well, I say, why are they naming him, right? And the judge said they can see no reason why it couldn't be mitigated. And I looked up the word, because I use mitigate quite a lot, but the definition was basically to minimize a bad circumstance. Yeah. We can avoid the bad circumstance by not naming him. What are we achieving here, apart from a bit of voyeurism? Why are we naming him? Because his kids, if he's got kids and they're in school and they're young and whatever, they're going to say, oh, your daddy's a murderer. This is what happens to friends of mine that have been involved in shootings. And then you've got some of the most violent people in society who are not most friendly with police, knowing where they are. And the judge said, well, we're not going to give his date of birth or his address. I'm sorry. Really? 2000?